257. You're going to need it open for our sermon today, unless you want to keep happening to open it up again and again. So open up to 257, O come, Emmanuel. And we're actually going to sing the first verse. Not just our gospel, but also Isaiah. They speak of the coming Emmanuel, the person we actually ask and long for in this song. O come, Emmanuel, which is God with us. It reminds us of Jesus' purpose for this world. You know, the Israelites were not strangers to being captive, being in exile. The Babylonians, when they took over Jerusalem, they took all of the higher educated, higher wealthy Israelites, plucked them up and brought them back to Babylon. That's exile. And then when they came back, they had to figure out how do we do life together with those who stayed and those who come. And at the same time, they're also, in the same time, while in Babylonian captivity, we also see in our gospel there's another captivity that they speak of. She will bear a son, and you're to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. The coming Messiah has come because the people of Israel are captive to their sins, and his job, Emmanuel's job, what we're calling for, is to bring about those to right them and to help save the world. That's what it means for Jesus to be the Messiah. Thinking about that, let us go on to our next verse, verse 2. So in this song, we have a calling out to wisdom, a calling out to the one who can actually teach us about how God works, who God is, and what our role is in this world. And that's what Jesus did. He taught us how to live. He showed us the power of God's love. Let us continue with the third verse.
Rejoice.
doesn't do it by slaughtering a bunch of innocent people. No, instead, he shows it by giving up his son on the cross. And the Christian promise that we have then is that strength is shown on the cross. Not weakness, but strength is shown, because it is by that death on the cross that Jesus took our sins, took our faults, took our very lives with him, so that by his sacrifice we could be made clean. Let us continue to the fourth verse. And that's where we get Jesse. For those that don't know, David's dad's name was Jesse. Uncle Jesse for his brothers, kids. Anybody that tried? My apologies. Just stick with the manuscript read. But David was given a promise that his lineage would last forever, and we get from our verse today, we see Joseph, son of David, part of the line of David. This will be your son. Take him as your own. Do not divorce Mary, but actually take him. And when he's born, give him the name Jesus. Give him the name that people will know from all around the world, that they will know that he is my son that I have sent. And the amazing part is, by that empty tomb, when Jesus had rose from the dead, he claimed reign, not just over the world, but over death itself. Jesus lives and exists into eternity. And so therefore the reign of David exists and lives into eternity. That's the power of the resurrection. That's the fulfillment of this covenant God made with David. And now, I don't think we want an 8-point sermon, so let's skip ahead to verse 6. There's a dirginess to that song, but it speaks of a real joy. And it's almost true, because there's a difference between joy and there's a difference between happiness. Happiness comes from circumstance. Happiness we come through by luck. You know, other words that have those first 3 letters of hap is happenstance, haply, haphazard. Those aren't planned. Those are just words that talk about things that happen, clusters that happen. And so instead, what today we celebrate, it's not happiness but joy. The joy that comes to us by learning the good news about that death and about that resurrection and what that means for us. And the amazing thing about joy, above happiness, is that even in the worst times in life, even when you are sad, depressed, dealing with death, dealing with sickness, dealing with hurt and heartbreak, even in the midst of all of that, us 2,000 years ago. That's what the angel is telling Joseph about. That's why Mary has come with child, this idea of God with us. Jesus was actually one of us. And even though he died 2,000 years ago, it is by his death and resurrection that we know that God is with us today. And it is by that death and resurrection that we can be joyful, that we can be filled with joy. And so, one more time, let us invite Jesus, the life-saving, life-giving Emmanuel, God with us, to continue to enter our hearts, to continue to enter our very souls, to instill us with his goodness, so that we can rejoice. Let us finish with verse 8 of Come